Documentary is the wild, wild west. It's the most experimental genre of cinema. I wanted to be a director before I could speak. I wanted to make films. Making Montage of Heck was really inspiring because Kurt was so creative. I began to question why I was only making films about men. Here's the story of a woman who overcame everything to achieve her dreams. Nobody had ever gone into the wild to study chimpanzees. Ever. The historical and cultural significance was as profound as landing a ship on the moon. You know, sometimes we choose our films and sometimes they choose us. I don't think I realized then how much I needed this film for my own soul. I'm at work at 8:15 in the morning and I leave work at 2:15 in the morning. It doesn't even feel like work. If you can find a way to make your passion your life's work, then you've found the key to happiness and success in life.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of. This week on the show, we have the Oscar-nominated documentary filmmaker Brett Morgen. You would have known him for his film Montage of Heck about the legendary and now dead musician Kurt Cobain. I love that film. And now he's back with Jane, his biopic on Jane Goodall, who is the legendary British primatologist who went down to Africa and first discovered that animals use tools. She watched the chimpanzees, and this film is absolutely stunning. The crazy thing is I actually interviewed Jane Goodall about 2 years ago at Windsor Castle. She's a very, very special lady, and National Geographic found over 100 hours of footage in their archives that was 50 years old, and Brett put all this together in what is really an amazingly beautiful film to watch. It's like you're out there in the jungle with Jane. It's really incredible, and he tells this story about a woman struggling with her work, struggling with being a female back then and doing what she was doing, and it really is an epic, epic piece of work. And Brett is a fascinating guy, a very cagey guy. This is definitely the longest and the best interview he's ever done. And if you're a documentary filmmaker or you want to know what it really takes to be at the top, Brett shares some amazing tips and techniques and strategies and mindsets toward the end of this interview. One of my favorites. As a documentary filmmaker myself, I loved his insights. And you know, I love it when people come here and listen to this inspiration, but London Real is more about transformation. And that's what we do inside our academy. And this coming weeks, we are actually transforming people by teaching them in our Business Accelerator. We're showing you how to take your passion and turn it into a business, but we do all sorts of things in there. We teach you how to public speak. We teach you how to start your own podcast and broadcast yourself. And we also teach you how to accelerate your life with amazing high performance habits. So come check us out there. And now I leave you with the incredible documentary filmmaker, Mr. Brett Morgen. London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Reel Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level, together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon. This is London Reel. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Brett Morgen, the Oscar-nominated filmmaker whose work includes documentaries on the Rolling Stones, Kurt Cobain, and now the pioneering primatologist Jane Goodall. The new film, Jane, draws from over 100 hours of never-before-seen footage that has been in National Geographic's archive for over 50 years. The movie has been rumored for an Oscar nod, and critics are calling it one of the best documentaries of 2017. Brett, welcome to London Reel.
Thank you.
It's awesome having you here. I was a huge fan of Montage of Heck, and I'm sure people have asked you this, but what's it like to go from 7 or 8 years inside of Kurt Cobain's brain to now going inside Jane's brain?
What a fucking...
Go ahead, go ahead.
What a relief.
What a relief.
What a relief. If it was the other way around, it would be difficult. It would probably be much worse, but... making Montage of Heck was really inspiring. It was a tremendous amount of joy, believe it or not, because Kurt was so creative. But I spent a good 6 months on the road promoting that film, and that got to be very difficult and challenging, and having to talk about him all the time, and it really wore on me. It took a toll on me, and I was looking for something a little brighter, or something a little more aspirational. And National Geographic called me about doing this film about Jane. And, sometimes we choose our films and sometimes they choose us. And I don't think I realized then how much I needed this film for my own soul. The movie, a lot of people have told me they've cried. I was just with a reporter this morning who told me she was crying 20 minutes into the film all the way through, but not with sadness, but with tears of joy. And sort of in awe of this woman. And I think that Jane has that effect. It's a very soothing film. It's a very calming film. I mean, for someone, if someone who's come out of a PTSD situation like Montage of Heck, it really is the best place to spend your time. Because what we did in Montage, what we did in Jane was kind of create an immersive experience. Jane's been on film she's been in a lot of movies, but none of them really kind of capture the world through her point of view, as she's articulated it. And we wanted to invite the audience to kind of experience Gombe through Jane's eyes as she first experienced it, using footage entirely exclusively shot in the 1960s. My blueprint, my script, was Jane's book, In the Shadow of Man, which is a seminal book. It's read by school kids for decades now, and adults. It's an adult book. And the way Jane talks about nature and the way she talks about Gombe, it's almost like 100 Years of Solitude. There's like this element of magical realism that enters that story. You see, because what Jane viewed was a world of color, a world of magic, whereas if you and I go to Gombe, it may just be very brown or green. And so we try to present the world as she describes it, as she experienced it. And so there's a tremendous amount of magical realism in the film, and as a result, you're sitting in the jungle, experiencing it the way Jane did, which is pure bliss. That's the difference. Kurt never really arrived at that place in his life, ever, really, where he was that content. Yeah. Even in moments where in any other person's life, or even in a movie, I remember in Montage of Heck, the moment Nirvana broke out, that would generally be a montage of a celebratory montage for any other documentary, but in Kurt, Montage of Heck, I cut to a sequence of Smells Like Teen Spirit done by a choir that's a somber, it's basically a funeral dirge. And it's signifying his inevitable doom. Right. You know, and so what should be joyous isn't. And in Jane, we actually get to experience that joy. We get to experience that sense of awe that both Jane had as well as the cinematographer Hugo van Lawick.
And you needed that as an artist as well.
I needed that at that point in my life to be able to learn how to sort of breathe again and be more introspective and reflective. And, you know, Jane really helped me understand the sort of connectivity amongst the natural world and our world. And you know, when you're making these films, you really get very like locked in and sort of lost. And it's just, it's really an amazing experience. I knew nothing about her, very little about Jane going into this. And for those who don't know, well, for those who think they know her story, you're in for a real treat. And for those who know very little of her story, you're kind of in for a treat, because I think Jane is one of the most amazing people we have on this planet. And what she accomplished is so extraordinary. And the fact it was all captured on film, captured beautifully on 16 millimeters, it's a true treat.
I watched the film last night and I felt like I was in a time capsule. I felt like you kind of snapped your fingers and I was watching it in real time. And again, that footage is shot and it's these, I don't know, intimate pictures of Jane, and then the color, and you can see the novelty in her. I don't know, it's just something that's, it's weird. It kind of transcended cinema in a weird way. And I didn't know why I felt that emotionally.
Yeah. Well, the movie's shot by a man who would eventually become her husband, and he was falling in love with her as they were shooting the film. And so when we say that it's lovingly photographed, it truly is lovingly photographed. And if you find yourself, whether you're a man or a woman or pansexual, whatever you may be, if you find yourself falling for Jane, there's a good reason, because
Guilty.
So is the person behind the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you fall in love with Jane a little bit when you made this movie?
I think, no. After I finished the film, I did, which I think benefited the film and my work experience. But neither, and I would say Jane, if she was here, would say the same thing, that since I finished the film, we both are enamored with one another. Having made the film, Jane didn't want anything to do with the film to start, and I was enamored by her when I saw her. When I first started looking at the images, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I was like, it's like Meryl Streep when she's 26 years old. I mean, Jane was, you know, and I hate to objectify her, because what she achieved was essentially, she had to overcome all of that sort of gender objectification. But it's just a fact that Jane physically was stunning looking. And that certainly helped sell her work. She talks about it in the film. She was well aware of it. I was in awe of her strength and her courage. But you know, when I went to interview her for the film, she was not that. She was a bit of a contrarian.
On the phone?
No, in person.
Oh, in person.
In person. She was a bit contrarian. She just, you know, she didn't see why this film was being made. You see, she had done films. She didn't feel like there was anything left to do with that footage. She had never seen my work. Now, I have to say that Jane had, since then, now that she's seen the film, loves the film and thinks it's the only film anyone should ever watch, and thinks it's the only time it's ever been done right. But back then, she just didn't think it was possible to do it right using that footage. Okay. It really took 2.5 years of an immense and immersive sound design, coupled with hundreds of hours of color grading, to take this old footage and present it in a way that felt modern and new and fresh.
Can you tell me what was the thing that finally made you say yes? Because I'm guessing the first time they contacted you said, Jane who? And then it's like, do this piece, and she's not necessarily going to give you a lot of time,
yeah,
and a lot of things going against you. What was the thing that finally made you do it?
Well, two things. One, whether I want to admit it to myself or not, I began to question why I was only making films about men. You know, what else was there for me to learn? I mean, there's an endless amount I could learn, but really, in terms of my own growth, you know, I did a film about Robert Evans, the movie producer, called The Kid Stays in the Picture, and then I did a film on the Rolling Stones. Now, both artists represent, Bob produced all the movies I loved growing up, and the Stones were the music I grew up with. And so I looked at both those films in a way as me trying to identify a father figure. And my father was a PE teacher, and I'm not very athletic, so I didn't really relate on that level. And the Kurt film was also very autobiographical, and I think in terms of me sort of exploring issues related to my parents and Kurt's parents were born the same years, same generational issues, and same sort of narcissistic tendencies, which is not specific to them, but to that whole generation, the boomer generation. So Jane offered an opportunity to explore something that I hadn't explored. That was one. More importantly, when I looked at the, sorry, that was a long roundabout answer. The more directly, when I looked at the footage.
And you'd never explored a female figure in a film?
No, never.
Right.
But when I looked at the footage, it was like watching the moon landing. I mean, I instantly recognized that there were, that on one hand, the historical and cultural significance of Jane's work was as profound as landing a ship on the moon in the 1960s.
Right.
I mean, it was something that had never happened in the history of evolution and would never happen again.
Because she saw something that changed the way we saw.
Well, not only that, she went, nobody had ever gone into the wild to study chimpanzees. Ever.
Isn't that strange when you hear her tell the story that she was the first one?
The world wasn't so small back then, right. You know, so going to Africa to study chimpanzees was not a simple thing. Yeah. And the fact is that chimpanzees spooked, so they would run away, and people didn't know how to handle that. So they would go out, they would try to do it, and they'd fail epically. You know, people would go out there for 2 months, 3 months, not see a chimp and leave. Failure was not an option for Jane. So she was going to stick with it no matter what. And so there was that aspect. You know, there was, here's someone walking into nature, walking into Eden, and not only observing, but getting so close that she's essentially invited to be a housemate with them. And then during the course of her study, they realized that it was humans and chimps should have no close contact, and that humans could never touch chimps again. So essentially, you see this person go from a total outsider to having this completely intimate experience where they're grooming the chimps to being unallowed, disinvited to do that ever again. And so this would never happen. Cinematically, what Hugo achieved, Hugo the cameraman, can't even be put into words. It alone is as difficult as trying to land a ship on the moon. Hugo tried to shoot color 16mm by himself in Africa without the ability to see what he was doing. He had only shot one film previous to this. It was an absolute neophyte. And technically, to create these images was, I think, one of the great cinematic achievements of his time.
And you've shot in 16mm before.
I started my career in 16mm, and it's a freaking nightmare. I mean, and you can't do it by one person alone. It's like, it's just unheard of. So,
and yet you struggled to find a frame that was overexposed and bad footage.
Oh, Hugo, because it was his first film, his second film, but first big assignment for National Geographic, he couldn't see the dailies. He wasn't going to be in DC when they screened them or developed them. So he insisted on making sure that everything was perfect. And there was never a shot that was underexposed or overexposed. Now, Jane hated this. Jane would see some action, go, Hugo, film it. He would be like, no, the light's bad. And she'd go, Hugo, film it. And we need to get financing. And he would be like, I'm not shooting it. Sorry, Jane. And I understand where they were both coming from. But fortunately, in time, he got all the coverage he needed, and we're the great beneficiaries of this beautiful film.
Right. So a bunch of freak occurrences. The fact that 26-year-old Jane, no medical training, goes there. She's so all in. This is what she loves to do, be with the animals. And then all of a sudden, this amazing filmmaker is paired with her to capture it, and they're falling in love. I mean, what a crazy thing to happen. And then now you have the footage. Yeah,
no. And then I'm like 60 years later, like it was like as if it was put in a freaking glass ship and sent across the ocean. And then like I'm like, hey, what the hell is this?
And she's still alive.
And she's alive, yeah, and she remembers everything. And yeah, it's a film that spans really 6 decades. And I do feel that in many ways, the film was never realized. You know, they attempted to make the film, but the technology wasn't there, or the cultural climate wasn't there. You know, it's interesting because we started this film, and the footage was discovered in 2014 in Washington, D.C. Now, 2014 in Washington, D.C., most of us thought we were going to have Hillary Clinton was going to become the next president. And there was a lot of hope and optimism in the world, I think. This is the days before Trump. And I think Trump really changed the culture. But you see, we're just plugging away making our film. And then like a week before our film premiered, the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke, which suddenly brought into light the role of women in the workplace and how difficult it is for women to achieve success in the workplace, and how frighteningly difficult it is to kind of overcome the structural opposition that they face today, not just mentioned back in 1960. And here comes this story of this woman who overcame everything to achieve her dreams, did not compromise a thing. Here's the story of a woman who didn't have to give up being a mother in order to have a career. That's something that's even in some cultures considered heresy today. Back then when Jane did it, it was in the early 70s, and it was an anomaly. But Jane never allowed herself to be defined by societal standards and norms. And she's always lived outside of that. So going back to Kurt Cobain and the Stones, I mean, she is a rock star. She's lived life by her own rules. She's bucked all sorts of status quo. And I think now, as this film comes out into the world, it's an inspiring story for children about following their passion, whether it's science, filmmaking, or music, whatever it may be. I think it's an important story for parents about listening to our children. And I think it's an even more important story of our time for women to see a story of another woman who's a hero, like the year of Wonder Woman, Patty Jenkins. I mean, Jane is a real life superhero who did things that no man could ever do, and yet refused to define herself by her gender. To this day, she's very uncomfortable with the phrase feminist. She doesn't see herself as a feminist at all. And I don't view her as a feminist. And I think that's why she's such an amazing role model, that she refused to be defined by gender. And
why do you say she did work that a man couldn't do?
Well, in order to be successful with the chimpanzees, it required a certain constitution and a certain degree of patience. Jane is almost monk-like in her ability to be quiet, to observe. Her father was a race car driver, an endurance race car driver in Europe in the 40s and 50s, and raced in Le Mans. And Jane's talked about that before, that she was born with this constitution. She could sit out in the middle of the African sun all day and subsist off nothing more than half a cup of water.
There's one shot where she's sitting in a tree, and I'm thinking, I could probably sit in that tree for about 12 minutes until it started to hurt my legs. And it looks like she would sit there for a day.
Yeah. She would, and on top of that, she could sit out there without allowing the bugs to affect her, without being scared by the animals. I mean, she really felt like she belonged there. Nothing was going to hurt her. I don't think any man on earth who had an ego could have done what Jane did, who 2 months into it could have still said, I'm not returning. Most men would have said, this is ridiculous, this can never be done, I'm going back to the university. Right. It took a while. By the way, Leakey understood this. That's why Leakey sent Diane Fossey Leakey always sent women in to study the orangutans and the gorillas and the chimpanzees. I think he also knew, well, also men are much more aggressive than women and are more threatening to the animals. So a male would pose much more of a threat and intuitively wouldn't know how to assume some of the more passive roles that a woman would have to. Jane wouldn't look them in the eye, and nobody taught her this. We know it now, but back then she was making it up.
Right.
So no man was able to succeed at doing this. This was something that it took Jane Goodall in order to do. She's the first and only person to ever do it under those circumstances.
How do you go about writing this script? I mean, did you know from the get-go that, okay, I want to try to make this about Jane's experiences, Jane's life, and try to draw the parallels? Or is that something that just becomes more and more evident as you saw the footage?
There were three things. One, she wrote this book called In the Shadow of Man, which was a tremendous blueprint. And I work in nonfiction for the most part. And part of why I do that is because it's more tangible. It's less abstract. For me, it's probably more abstract than some for other people, but for me, it's more tangible. And so like the kid says in the picture, I enjoy taking this 800-page book and adapting it and whittling it down and finding the through line of action. With Jane, I had In the Shadow of Man, which was very useful. Evaluating all the footage that was shot, it became clear to me almost immediately that this was like Eden. And that in many ways I set about to do a modern telling or re-examination of Eden. And in that story, of course, it doesn't end up with a happy ending. And nor, with Gombe, it didn't look like it was going to have a happy ending either for the same reason. Jane enters the forest. Before Jane comes in the film, the movie opens up with this montage of nature, and you see the symmetry and harmony between the insect world and the mammals and the plants and the trees and everything else. And the last
those were Hugo shots of the
Hugo
insects.
shots, yeah.
I was like, did he take those in modern times?
Every shot in the film is Hugo.
Those insect shots are intense.
And then, and then those were for a never-before-seen film that he was intending to make called The Insects of Gombe. Okay. Then the last image is of a snake on a log, and you hear the sound of a boat underneath it, which is the sound of human intrusion. And then Jane arrives, and until Hugo, Jane's there, she arrives into this Eden-esque world. But from the second she steps foot there, it would never be the same again. Now, she didn't totally destroy it. In fact, in the long run, Gombe has been preserved and is flourishing. And humanity gained all this great knowledge. But that particular family of chimps that she first encountered, half of them were decimated, by disease that came with human contact. So that was literally that. Look, I told you I wasn't in awe of Jane when I started this film. So I didn't go into it with this like reverence or anything.
Which, like you said, is the right way to make a documentary.
In this case, no. Sometimes you need to be in awe of your subject, and sometimes you don't. Everything's a little different. I would imagine if I was doing a more hateful character, it would be important to try to find more love.
Were you in awe of Kurt Cobain when you made that movie?
Well, Courtney comes to mind because you see, if people have seen Montage of Heck, it was critical that we presented Courtney through Kurt's eyes, not through the public's eyes. The public has been very hateful towards Courtney. Right. Yeah, judgmental about Courtney since she entered the scene. But Kurt was in love with her. And in fact, if you follow the logic of Montage of Heck, one of the reasons that led to his inability to be on this earth anymore, I think, was a betrayal by Courtney. Or perceived betrayal, however you want to look at it.
Right.
And so you have to understand why that he loved her, to understand why that would impact him so much. So that was a challenge there. There's an old line from John Ford. I love John Ford films. And John Ford said something about he had to find something human to appreciate even in the most, even in the most villainous character, which now going back to Ford's work, that's kind of a apology because for the first half century of his work, that's just totally not true. And the Indians, Native Americans are often presented slightly two-dimensional. It was later in his career when he did Cheyenne Autumn and some of his latter work that he took on a more gentle tone. But I think it's true. Anyways, going back to Jane, I think that I think that, yeah, today I stand in awe of her, completely in awe of her.
And it started off as Eden. She goes in
Oh, right.
poisons
So, yeah.
it.
Yeah, well, that's one, naively, innocently. She didn't poison it, just, it was a series of circumstances. There was a story that we were telling about her science, of course, and then there was a more important story about parenting and about female empowerment and about mothers, about moms. That was, and so we kind of wove those three. Usually what happens is after I've read all the books I'm going to read and screen through all the footage I'm going to screen through, I break away and write the script. At that point, it's pouring out of me. I mean, I think I've written most of my movies in a day or two.
Do you not let yourself write until that time?
Yes.
So it's all in your head.
Exactly.
And
so
you're
I'm
like,
ready to
"I gotta
burst.
go."
I'm ready to burst. Because deep into the screening, I've already locked into what I'm going to be able to make out of this footage. So the last half of the screening process is just making sure it's going to play itself out.
Okay.
Because the screening process, you got to remember, goes for 2 months. So you could say I'm writing in my head during that entire 2-month period, where I'm trying to check the angles and make sure that we're going to be able to land this where we need to land it.
Do you see the movie in your head?
Yeah, no, it starts with an attitude. It always starts, well, yes. All my films start with me writing down a series of words to describe the subject. And then that becomes the style of the film.
Okay.
And that's why each film looks different than the next. The styles become the personification of the subject.
Some of those words for Jane?
Jane was passion, probably first and foremost, connectivity, gentle, that sort of stuff, which really sort of embraces the sort of mise en scène of that film, whereas Kurt was everything but.
What kind of words for Kurt would it be?
See, now I can't remember the exact words anymore.
And so you get the words in your brain.
I get the words in my brain. I mean, Bob Evans, I remember very specifically, was like, kitschy, romantic, sexy, and that's what the kid says in the picture is.
Okay. And do you talk to anyone about your ideas, or is it all in your head?
No. I've never had a collaborator like that. I mean, I did actually, when I started my career, I did my first film with someone, and so that was great. And then since then, I kind of don't. Which is fine, because I don't really want anyone's input at that point at all. In fact, I absolutely do not want anyone's input. I find that to get to this station in life where you have final cut over your films is a privilege. It is a privilege that I have worked and fought tirelessly to achieve. And I preserve that, and I hold on to that sanctity. And I don't like to see, people ask me, like, I ran into a filmmaker when I was doing montage, and she said, "Oh, you're doing that film, you must have seen my film." And I said, "What's your film?" And she told me the name of her film, and I said, "Well, why would I have watched that?" And she goes, "Because it's considered the greatest rock and roll film of all time." And I looked at her and I was like, why would I want to watch, what's that have to do with Kurt Cobain and my film? Like, I'm sure your film is about whatever narrative your film is on. My film's on whatever narratives my film's on. And I could tell you that I don't like to look at other films for inspiration, documentaries, when I'm working on a film. My fear is that I'm going to see something and I'm going to like it so much I'm not going to want to do it. Because I take pride in the fact that my films, that each film is rather unique. And I don't understand, like, I did this film, The Kid Sees in the Picture, and then people started doing the photo animation. I don't understand it. Like, I even haven't done that photo animation since that film. Like, I never wanted to do it again. It had been done. And I think what's exciting in film, and particularly documentaries, unlike fiction, where the language has only evolved in baby steps since the Great Train Robbery. I mean, you could go from Potter to Spielberg, and it's literally grown like that. But documentary is the wild, wild west. Anything goes in documentary. It's the most experimental genre of cinema.
More constraints give you more freedom somehow.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's like, because you can do this film a myriad, 100 different fucking ways, and unlike cinema, unlike dominant cinema, where you generally are tied down to putting the camera on either this side or that side of the action, there are no rules. There literally are no rules. And that makes it really fun and exciting and fresh. And one of the things I love about nonfiction, there's this question that people ask, like particularly when you're doing subjects of people that have been well-traveled. So you're doing a film on the Rolling Stones. What are you going to tell me that's new? What are you going to tell me that's fresh? Or you're doing a film on Jane Goodall. So what new information did you unearth? Well, I'm not a journalist, okay? If I thought that someone had done, if I didn't think there was space for me to make the type of films I'm going to make, I wouldn't make them. But the reality is, most people who came to documentary came at it from a journalistic standpoint. I've approached documentary from a cinematic standpoint. So my question is always, how can we tell this story in a uniquely cinematic manner? What can we offer that can only be achieved in film that you couldn't write a book about? Because otherwise, write a book. Yeah. Okay? Books are way better for biographies. You get 800 pages. You know how many hours that is in film time? That's like a 150-hour-long film. Okay? I get 90 minutes. So it's either going to be Cliff Notes to history, it's either going to, or Wikipedia. I mean, the worst documentary biopics are Wikipedia entries. And they travel, they go, oh, well, they had this hit record there, and they have this hit record there. And so I'm always asking myself, what can I do that's specific and unique to cinema to bring the story to life? And in the case of the Stones, I'd read a bunch of books about them, and I'd seen the films, or there really hadn't been a film that kind of transcended a moment in time, because all their films were really like Altamont or the 65 Irish Tour or whatever. So I thought there was room and a space. With Jane, there was clearly an opportunity to do an immersive movie. I mean, and nothing like it had ever been done really using this material. So that's what's exciting to me.
You said the word immersive. You're known for this intensive immersive style.
Yeah.
If you had to describe it, what would it be? And when I look at Montage of Heck, I mean, the things you're doing in there, like, you know, animating Kurt, I mean, I don't remember ever seeing a documentary that did that. Is that what you're talking about, the Wild West? Yeah,
a little bit. Well, like the fact that I used a different style of Montage of Heck than we used in Kid Stays in the Picture, which is a completely different style than the Stones film. Every film kind of, you can draw upon different tools, and we're not talking about locations or wardrobe. We're talking about things as grand as, is your story being told through talking head interviews, or is your story being told through reenactment? Is your story being told through animation? Is your story, I mean, there's just a myriad of ways to approach the same subject, and you can mix them all into one pot, which you really can't do in fiction. You know, outside of American Splendor and a couple Run Lola Run and maybe like a handful of films that we could put on a hand that use natural born killers that mix media. Yeah. Generally, that's just not a thing you do in the reason you don't do it is it pulls you out of the movie. But in documentary, like my movies are made, as I said at the beginning, they're junkyard constructions. They're made with scraps, so oftentimes that style will work.
Okay. And that intensive immersion is trying to get inside the subject's head. Like
intensive immersion, yes. One of the reasons, going back to why I wanted to do the Jane Goodall film, is that when I read In the Shadow of Man, Jane talked about how she rejected this idea of objectivity. That she, and this is not something learned. She didn't go to school and said, I'm going to reject this doctrine. She didn't know there was a doctrine of objectivity until later. So she went to Cambridge or Oxford later in life. At the time, she thought that in order to study the chimpanzees, she wanted to learn how they thought, she wanted to get inside their skin. She named them. At the time, scientists thought that you were supposed to give them numbers. You weren't supposed to, by naming them, you might get cross the line in terms of getting too close to them. But Jane wanted to get as close as possible to them, not just physically, but in terms of understanding them. You know, so she would sift through their feces. She would explore what they eat and they're eating, everything she could do to try to understand their patterns. I've done that with every movie. You know, going back to the Kid Stays in the Picture, that was the whole, I lived with Evans for a year, even though we didn't shoot one frame with him. The idea was I wanted to know what music he liked. I try to make a movie as if he was making it. If Bob had skills to make a film, that's what I intended to do with the kids he's in the picture. All my movies are essentially, my biopics, are essentially me trying to do an autobiography from the subject's point of view if they had the filmmaking chops to tell their story. So I like to think that if Kurt was doing, well, the only difference is if Kurt did his autobiography, it would have been much more nonlinear than Montage of Heck. It would have been much more like the audio cassette Montage of Heck. But that would have been to his detriment, I think.
What adjectives would you use to describe yourself as a filmmaker? Because when you spend a year with the subject without shooting a frame, is obsessive the right word, or are all filmmakers obsessive?
I think we're all obsessive. I think I'm a bit of a tsunami. You know?
What does that mean?
I mean, I think I live life to the extreme. Look, I'm very much like my films up to Jane. I'm not subtle. I can be. Yeah, I'm not a subtle person. I charge into situations head first. I can be quite volatile. And I'm very emotional. I'm very dramatic. I cry much more than a man my age should. So, you know, I have a tough facade and an incredibly emotional, sentimental core, which is the essence of all my movies, really. They're all about these rugged individuals who I try to find something on the inside that's some emotional core that I can really present. I think with Jane, you know, I had some health issues when I was putting Jane together, some major health issues. And I had to change my life or I wasn't going to be here today. And so I had to calm down. I had to basically throw away everything that I was in terms of how I was living my life, all my habits, and try to listen more and get a little more in touch with things. And then here I am making this film about Jane.
Yeah, I mean, is that the female energy of Jane, maybe?
Well, yeah. I mean, Jane's interesting. Jane's got some female and male energy for sure.
She could be pretty straight.
Yeah. Like, yeah, for sure. There was a moment where I was recovering from some health issues last year, and I found myself in that tree with Jane, so to speak. You know, sitting in a very similar type of tree, spending my entire day watching clouds coming in and out, and feeling connected, feeling the forces of nature and the connectivity that we all share, and it was really important that Jane was the film that I was working on at that moment in time.
Okay, and that's connected to nature, to your fellow humans?
Connected to everything. It's connected to just stopping and listening and breathing.
Okay. And do you think those qualities you described about yourself, you know, kind of intense on the outside, emotional on the inside, is that how you make those films as well? Does it need a director like you or a writer like you to make those types of films?
Look, I think here's the best way I could surmise me. My lawyer, John Sloss, once said that I am either the highest brow, lowbrow person he knows or the lowest brow, highbrow person he knows. And I've always loved that because I do find that to be very much how I feel like I'm entering things. I think that the success of my films has a lot to do with how sensitive and emotional I am. I think that I think it is kind of singular because they're bombastic and they're fearless in terms of the stylistic execution. And yet they're very sensitive to the subject. Right. So I do think that I think if I was less emotional, the films wouldn't have the warmth that they exude or they attempt to exude.
Continue watching this fascinating conversation for free by clicking on the link below to visit our website, and I'll see you on the inside.
I can tell you it is a lot harder to do documentary than fiction. a lot, like incomparable. And the fact there's an Academy Award for editing fiction, but no Academy Award for editing nonfiction is insane. It's utterly insane, and I have the world's greatest respect for editors. But let me just say this. When I came back from shooting a fiction show, I was able to throw an assembly edit in 4 days. Now, the assembly edit needed to be nurtured and loved for several more weeks and months or whatever. But you can't do that in a documentary film. There is no freaking way you're throwing an assembly edit in 4 days. It is an entirely different part of the brain.